Hello, and welcome to the Bible Stories Now channel. Have you ever thought that, to receive a great blessing from God, you might have to leave behind everything that makes you feel secure? It sounds counterintuitive, but that's exactly what Abraham did, and that decision transformed not only his life but also the course of human history. Maybe today you're waiting for a divine answer, but something is keeping you stuck in your comfort zone. The secret to a blessed life might just lie in doing what few are willing to do, trusting without seeing. Stick around and discover how Abraham's faith could be the key to changing your life today. The call of Abraham. After the dispersion at Babel, the world was immersed in idolatry, and the truth about the one true God seemed almost lost. But God always keeps a faithful remnant. And in the midst of this darkness of superstition, he chose Abraham. Imagine being surrounded by practices that go completely against the principles of faith. That was Abraham's reality in Ur of the Chaldeans, where even in his own household, there was the influence of other gods. However, God had bigger plans. Abraham was chosen to be the keeper of God's precious revelations, a channel through which future generations would come to know the true worship of the living God. It's interesting to see that, just like Abraham, we are often placed in challenging environments. Are we willing, even in the midst of opposing influences, to cling firmly to our faith and be bearers of divine light? This is the invitation Abraham's story makes to us. The rewards of the right choice. God promised Abraham something extraordinary: countless descendants, a great nation, and on top of that, the privilege of being the ancestor of the world's Redeemer. Think about it. Abraham received a promise that would transcend generations and touch every family on earth. Isn't that incredible? Abraham's choice to serve the one true God brought rewards that he might not have fully understood at the time, but that impacted all of human history. What about us? Can we see that our choices today, when based on trusting God, have the power to influence future generations? Abraham became the heir to promises that went far beyond material prosperity or earthly recognition. The true reward was knowing that through his lineage, God would fulfill the plan of salvation through Jesus. It's the same God who makes promises for our lives today. The question is, are we willing to trust him even when we don't see the full picture? The test of faith and Abraham's decision. God's call to Abraham was clear and challenging. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Imagine what that meant back then. There were no maps, no reliable communication systems, no comfortable means of transport. Abraham didn't know where he was headed, but he trusted God's promise. This is one of the most beautiful demonstrations of faith in the entire Bible. He didn't hesitate to obey. Abraham left everything he knew and set out, guided only by the divine voice. That kind of steadfast faith is something that inspires us to this day. How many times does God call us to step out of our comfort zone, to trust him without knowing exactly what the next step will be? Abraham's faith was based on absolute trust in God, even when everything seemed uncertain. Are we willing to do the same in our lives, allowing God to guide us, even when we don't have all the answers? Personal sacrifices. To follow God's call, Abraham had to make enormous sacrifices. He left behind his country, his relatives, his roots. There were strong ties holding him to his homeland, and it wasn't easy to break away from all of that. But still, he obeyed, trusting that God's presence would be more valuable than any earthly security. And honestly, how often do we face moments when we need to sacrifice something to follow God's will? Maybe it's a relationship that draws us away from faith, or personal ambitions that clash with the mission God has for us. Just like Abraham, we are called to trust that, no matter how difficult it is, sacrifices made in obedience to God will always result in blessings beyond anything we could imagine. Abraham's story teaches us that trials and challenges are opportunities to strengthen our faith and grow spiritually. So, the question is, are we willing to sacrifice what's precious to us in order to live the fullness of God's promises in our lives? Journey from Ur to Canaan. The first leg of the journey. Abraham began his journey by leaving Ur of the Chaldeans and traveling to Haran, a journey that was challenging in itself. Picture the scene: Abraham, with his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all his belongings, leaving behind everything they knew. There was no certainty about the final destination, just the trust that God was guiding their steps. This makes us think about what it truly means to trust God. Abraham didn't question the difficulties he would face along the way. He simply moved forward, guided by faith. When Terah, his father, died in Haran, Abraham faced yet another tough decision: continue the journey or stay put. Once again, he chose to trust God. Lot, his nephew, and Sarah, his wife, decided to join him, even though it meant giving up a stable and predictable life. How many times, when facing challenges and losses, are we invited by God to move forward without looking back? Abraham's journey reminds us that obedience to God isn't always easy, but it is always rewarding. Arrival in Canaan and first challenges. When Abraham arrived in Canaan, he settled in a place called Shechem, where he built an altar to the Lord. This is significant because it shows how Abraham's life was deeply marked by devotion and worship of the true God. Even in unfamiliar territory, Abraham did not hesitate to publicly demonstrate his faith, building altars and calling on the name of the Lord. This is a powerful example for us. Abraham did not seek to adapt to the practices of those lands. He stood firm in his faith, establishing a place of worship for God, even when surrounded by people who did not know the Lord. This teaches us that, no matter where we are or what we face, we must be living witnesses of our faith. Do we have the same courage as Abraham to build altars in our lives, to establish sacred spaces wherever we are, so that God is always honored? Despite the challenges that arose, Abraham remained faithful to his calling. Life of prayer and new test. Abraham's life in Canaan was one of constant prayer and communion with God. Wherever he went, he set up altars and invited everyone around him to worship the Lord. This is an example of how we should lead our lives. Every step, every decision, was marked by trust in God and dependence on His guidance. But then came a difficult test. The land was hit by a severe drought. Abraham, who had obeyed God's call, found himself in a land that did not have what was needed to sustain his family, his flocks, and his servants. Have you ever been in a situation where, even while obeying God, things seemed to go wrong? That was Abraham's reality at that moment. He needed to decide how to provide for his family and belongings. The drought was a test of his faith, but also an opportunity for him to continue trusting that God had a plan even in the midst of adversity. Abraham then decided to go down to Egypt, seeking temporary refuge. Notice, he didn't abandon Canaan, the land of promise, but found a solution to overcome that critical moment, keeping in his heart the hope that he would return. Abraham teaches us that, even in moments of scarcity and difficulty, our faith must remain firm, knowing that God never abandons us. The trial in Egypt. Reason for leaving. Abraham's journey in Canaan wasn't free of challenges. Imagine this situation. God had promised Abraham a prosperous land, but soon after, he was faced with a severe drought that threatened not only his flocks but the lives of everyone in his camp. This was a significant test of his faith. It wasn't easy to leave the land of promise, even temporarily, and seek sustenance in Egypt. The decision to go down to Egypt was practical and necessary at the time, showing that faith doesn't eliminate the need to act. Trusting God doesn't mean we won't face difficulties. On the contrary, those difficulties are often the very testing ground of our faith. The question that arises for us today is, when we face periods of scarcity or unexpected challenges, how do we respond? Are we willing to act while remaining confident that God is in control, even when the path seems uncertain? A weak point in Egypt. When Abraham arrived in Egypt, he faced a situation that revealed his vulnerability. Fearing for his own life because of Sarah's beauty, he asked her to tell the Egyptians that she was his sister. This was a deviation from complete trust in God. Abraham, who had thus far shown unshakable faith, wavered in the face of imminent danger. He tried to protect himself through his own means rather than fully trusting in divine protection. Isn't it like that with us too, sometimes? When circumstances seem threatening, we may be tempted to act on our own, taking shortcuts and compromising the values we believe in. The most impressive part here is how God intervened to protect Sarah, even when Abraham failed to trust fully. Pharaoh, upon discovering the truth, rebuked Abraham and returned his wife, acknowledging that Abraham's God was powerful and protective. God, in his mercy, ensured that, even amid failure, his plans would not be thwarted. This brings us comfort and hope. Even when we fail, God remains faithful. He intervenes to protect us and guide us back to the right path because his promises are firm and unbreakable. Leaving Egypt and divine protection. When Abraham finally left Egypt, the departure was amicable. Pharaoh, despite everything that had happened, treated Abraham with respect and ensured his safe departure. Abraham left Egypt enriched, not just materially, but also in experience and understanding of God's grace and protection. Imagine how impactful it must have been for Abraham and everyone who traveled with him to see God's hand acting so clearly to protect them, even after their failures. This particular experience also became a living testimony of God's power before the nations. The fact that Pharaoh and his people witnessed the divine judgments because of Sarah set a precedent. Abraham's God was unlike the idols of Egypt. He was a God who truly cared for and protected his people. This testimony resonated for a long time, ensuring that Abraham was treated with respect by other Gentile nations in the future. Interestingly, Abraham's experience in Egypt foreshadowed what would happen centuries later, when his descendants would also go to Egypt due to famine and be liberated by the mighty hand of God. This teaches us that sometimes God allows us to face difficult situations to prepare our hearts for the future, so we can trust him even more and bear witness to his power and care. Application for today. Example of faith and obedience. Abraham's life is a powerful example of faith and obedience that transcends generations. Imagine what it means to be called to a journey with no certain destination, just the promise that God would guide your steps. This requires total surrender and abandonment of any earthly security in exchange for unwavering trust in the Lord. Today, Abraham's story challenges us to reflect on our own willingness to follow God. Are we willing to obey his call, even when it means stepping out of our comfort zone and leaving behind what makes us feel secure? Abraham's obedience teaches us that true faith is demonstrated when we trust God without reservation, even when we don't have all the answers. This is the essence of the Christian walk, to trust that God has a perfect plan even when we can't see it clearly. Abraham's story reminds us that God values faith that acts, that moves, that responds to his call, even in the face of uncertainty. Trials and spiritual growth. The trials Abraham faced were opportunities for his spiritual growth. Every challenge, from the call to leave his homeland to the drought in Canaan and the test in Egypt, served to purify and strengthen his faith. Isn't that also true for us? Often, the trials we face seem inexplicable, and we wonder why God allows us to go through such difficult situations. Abraham's life gives us an answer. God uses these experiences to teach us to depend solely on him. It's in the heat of the trial that true character is revealed and refined. Imagine a goldsmith working with gold. He heats the metal until all the impurities are removed and the gold becomes pure and radiant. God does the same with us. He allows us to go through difficult situations, not to destroy us, but to purify us, so that our faith shines even brighter. The lesson here is clear. We shouldn't fear trials but see them as opportunities to draw closer to God and become stronger spiritually. Divine protection. Abraham's experience in Egypt teaches us about God's constant vigilance and protection over his children. Even when Abraham failed to reveal Sarah's true identity, God stepped in to protect them. This shows us that divine protection doesn't depend on our perfection but on God's faithfulness to fulfill His promises. In our lives, how often do we feel vulnerable, surrounded by situations that seem beyond our control? Abraham's story reminds us that God is always in control, caring for every detail, even when we fail. He is a God who watches over His own, who protects those who seek Him, not because of our merit, but because of His infinite grace. This should bring comfort to our hearts. No matter how weak or imperfect we are, God remains faithful. He guards us, guides us, and, when needed, corrects us with love, ensuring that, in the end, His purposes are fulfilled in our lives. Like Abraham, we are called to trust that even in the most adverse situations, God's care is with us, and His promises will never fail. At this moment, wherever you are, I invite you to lift your thoughts to God and receive the blessing of a powerful prayer that I will begin now. Dear God, thank you for showing us, through Abraham's life, the value of faith and obedience. We are grateful for your protection, even when we fall short. We ask for strength to trust you during our trials and for courage to respond to your call, leaving behind our fears and insecurities. May we follow in Abraham's footsteps, growing spiritually and reflecting your light. Bless each one of us. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Now that we've explored Abraham's journey together, take a moment to think about your own life. Where is God calling you to trust Him more? What areas of your life require a step of faith? I challenge you to put into practice what you've learned today, seeking, just like Abraham, to obey God's call, even without all the guarantees. Comment below, what touched you the most in this story? Was it the example of faith, personal sacrifice, or divine protection? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this content inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share so that more people can be blessed. See you in the next video.